Thank you, Gene. Beautiful, spiritual, of people that long for the rest of God. A rest that was like unto the joyful celebration of the campground settings. A time that was almost like a sanctuary from the hardened slave work, being in chains some of the time. We cannot picture the times, but we are grateful for the faith that was nurtured in the people who were enslaved in that unfortunate history of our country. Beneath the cross of Jesus, I fain would take my stand, the shadow of a mighty rock within a weary land. A home within the wilderness, a rest along the way from the burning of the noontide heat and the burden of the day. A rest along the way. We're talking about being tired. We're talking about being worn out. We're talking about being weary. We're talking about the promise that we have of Jesus. Come unto me, all you who weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. These are wonderful words of promise from Jesus. But we must be clear that the burden to which he was referring to, not entirely, but yet most specifically, was a burden of religion. You see that Jesus noticed and embraced the faith of his day. He was nurtured by Joseph and Mary. He was regular in the synagogues. One time when he was attending a synagogue, they asked him to stand up and read the lesson. And he read those words from the book of Isaiah, being sent as a people of God. But Jesus was hypercritical, not hypocritical, hypercritical of his brothers and sisters in the faith. We might ask, why would he be so harsh on his fellow Pharisees? Because he knew them. He was one of them. And the language of Matthew 24 may be a little too harsh for us when we realize that it is recorded by the writer of Matthew to be the words and sentiments of Jesus concerning religion. And the religion was just a plain old burden. And he talked about the fact that the Pharisees would make burdens for people, and they would not lift one finger to raise those burdens and to relieve them. He talked about them as having all kinds of good appearance on the outside. But he said they're really dirty dishes. They look kind of clean, but if you examine them, they got lots of leftover stuff on them. Or they're like these whitened sepulchres that you see on the hillsides and everywhere. Beautiful on the outside, but utterly full of dead men's bones. He also said, people who are religious He included himself in that. Go to the end of the earth to make converts. And yet they are more full of the devil than anyone else. Twice as much children of hell. He said that they're blind guides, people that are groping to find the way and the route and the path, but they as leaders are blind. He said, they're folks that are very, very particular. They tithe everything. If they're going to have a bit of spice, they'll tithe part of that. But they neglect the weightier matters of the law. Jesus is exceedingly hard and his words are harsh. And he says the burden of religion is twisting heritage and history. Jesus says you claim to stand with the prophets, but instead you are descendants of those who murdered the prophets and murdered the wise men sent by God. Some of them you kill and crucify. Others you will beat in your synagogues and chase them from town to town. You are a brood of snakes. How will you escape being condemned to hell? Now, this is not some mad preacher. This is someone who observed the religion of his day and said it just places an awful load upon people that is utterly unnecessary, and I'm sure we would say unscriptural, not prophetic, not honest, not helpful. For God has blessed the human heart with the religious impulse, which brings together the center and the fringe, but always in tension. Like a wheel that has strong spokes, and as it spins, the edges hold because there's a connection between the center and the edge. James says good religion is that which recognizes the widows and the orphans and takes care of them. The point is that Jesus is saying unless religion brings together the heart and the head, brings together the traditional and the unexplored, brings together the old like the wineskins and the new, and pushes towards the new, it's just burdensome. And it's not worth a whole lot. So we as religious people of today ought to all examine our hearts and our minds. Are we being burdened unnecessarily? Or are we finding in Jesus who said, "Come unto me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my burden upon you. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden lifts." It lives. Now we cannot just assume that the body of Christ of which we are a part will transform us into better Christians. We have to not only work at it, we have to contribute towards it, we have to give ourselves for it. And Jesus talked about this, in that it has to always be connected between the center and the hub. Otherwise, it says, like people who are very particular about everything, but yet they neglect the weightier matters of the law. and they cannot recognize justice from a hole in the ground. They can't see society's glaring inequalities and harmful ways. They cannot take a stand for anything unless it brings them personal satisfaction. They do not open their eyes to new possibilities because they are so content what they have known for year after year after year after year. Take my burden upon you. It's freeing. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Come and learn of me. Now, in saying this, we don't need to be too awfully harsh in our criticism. And you remember that Jesus in this same book said, watch out, those of you are too hard in judging others. Take the log out of your eye so you can see the speck in other eyes. But at the same time, the prophets spoke and Jesus spoke, and we are to speak and be aware of the drift among us towards burdens that should not be borne by any human being. You know, I was working in a bank when I was living in Independence. My dad had died in 1944. Mother and I and my sister, my brother was in the service, getting ready to get shot at and almost killed. We moved back from Coleman, Alabama to Independence, Missouri. I had an uncle who was an officer in the bank in Kansas City, and there was an opening there, and he put a good word in for me, and I became a messenger boy. Hauled money around on streetcars and banknotes, and, well, I don't think I hauled much money. Banknotes and checks and communications and stuff like that. But there was a lady there that I'll always remember. Her legs were so tired looking. Her feet were rolled over. Every step seemed to hurt as she walked. Her name was Miss Anna Musial. I can still see her in her mind, and folks, that's a long time ago. What Miss Anna would do, before she would come to work, she would go to Mass. At noon, she would go to church. After work, she'd go to church. That's not my style. Sometimes I don't want to go to church. And yet I'm supposed to be one of those who helps it to keep going, you know. And I'm grateful for that. But Miss Anna, I mean, she went every day as regular, hobbling down the street to go to church. Now, should she be recognized and applauded? That's up to God. But if there was in her life no penchant for justice and truth, it didn't do her much good. Miss Anna Musial, bless her heart, I can still see her. She made her way. Well, a lot of us do a lot of things to get peace with ourselves and to ease our conscience. That's okay. But Jesus says, do it as a servant of mine. Learn of me. Learn. George Burns says that after 80 years we've learned everything, but we can't remember any of it. Mahatma Gandhi, wonderful fellow, he put it this way: live as if you were to die tomorrow. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. Live as if you were to die tomorrow. Learn as if you were to live forever. To be able to learn is a gift that God gives to all of us. Sometimes I'm tempted to buy that notion, old dogs don't learn new tricks. I know how hard it is to change my ways and to learn something new. How easy it is for me to be very judgmental. Why do they do it that way? Why does he say that? Why does she say that? It's very easy for me to be self-centered. And I think it's an occupational hazard. We're used to standing in front of people. We're greeted and usually in most communities respected. Pretty easy to get selfish and self-centered. And sometimes when something's demanded of me that I really don't want to do, I'm reared back on my heels and made to think, why are you behaving that way? Friends, I think that God works with us in those ways as we examine ourselves, not only when we come to the Lord's table, but all the time. Now, as we look at the face of religion in the world today and our own lives, may we recognize that Jesus calls us to take up his cross. Jesus calls us to take up the yoke and learn of him. Jesus invites us to celebrate a faith and to promulgate that faith that not only is enthusiastic, but is honest and is faithful. I don't know if you read the little news note this past week. It sure surprised me. Let me just tell you about it. Pope Francis, the new pope over in the Vatican, he admitted that atheists are capable of doing good. Atheists are capable of doing good. Well, some of the boys in the Curious, and I think I would use the word right, some of the boys, they got a little scared, get a little too liberal. So here's what they said. The church believes all salvation comes from Christ, the head, through the church, which is his body, meaning those with the awareness of the Catholic Church who refuse to enter her or remain in her cannot be saved. The spokesman also made it clear that church doctrine considers salvation off limits to members of other churches, other religions, other branches of Christianity. Although people who've never been exposed to Christianity might still have a shot for heaven. Catholics do not, and I quote, do not adopt the attitude of religious relativism, which regards all religions as on the whole equally justifiable. We wrestle with this. We believe strongly in our faith. We believe in the gospel. But we sure as shooting don't think like those folks I've just quoted. Well, learn of Jesus. Learn of Jesus who is lowly and humble in heart. Learn of Jesus who is lowly and humble in heart. You remember that old song? There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. No one could heal all our souls' diseases. No, not one. No, not one. Jesus knows all about our struggles. He will guide till the day is done. There's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Come, my yoke is easy. My burden is light. Learn of me, Jesus said, and you will find rest for your souls. Rest now on the journey. Rest when you're weary. Rest when you're full of anxiety. Rest when your body is aching. Rest when your heart is crushed. Rest when you're stumbling. For Jesus goes with you. Lo, I am with you unto the end of the ages. Take my yoke upon you. Learn of me, and you will find rest for your soul.